while I say I was lucky, I do believe that when preparation meets opportunity, it turns into luck. There was a little bit of preparation that I had to think that I need to have my understanding right of what the work I want to deliver. Who are the people I really wanted to meet? Who are the people I really want to build relationships with? I needed to do that prep in advance. Right? I needed to do what work I really want to go and do there. So it was not like all fun and only culture. But yeah, you had to do a little bit of prep. What holds people to different engagements in life? What holds people back? Why people want to leave company? Learning started very early in my life. And so I keep thinking that learning has been a thread for me throughout the year.
LOAA. You listen, you observe, you absorb, and then you action. I think if you do that in a review setting, it would work in your favor.
The thought that, their incentives are different versus the company that acquires the company has a different incentive. So then how do you sort of bring them on the same page? The two things that were extremely important for us is that what are the steps that we can take if we could conserve some jobs? And the second was that when we have to take the last resort, we are going to do it absolutely gracefully and we're going to do it really well.
Today we have someone truly special with us. Pooja Kapoor is an accomplished HR leader with over 2 decades of experience shaping culture, people strategies, and org transformation. She's currently heading Human Potential and Transformation at Hero FinCorp and has been associated with brands like Google, Tesco, eValueServe, and many others. She's an award-winning HR leader who was recognized as Asia-Pacific Top 50 Most Influential HR Tech Leaders and has also been conferred Women's Super Achiever Award by Global HRD Congress. A very warm welcome to you, Pooja, today, and really sorry for this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Pooja, start from the very beginning, right? Talk us through your experience, talk us through your journey. What led you choose HR? What has helped you evolve as a leader, right? And I mean, all the audience would also want to know that what does it take to occupy a coveted position like you're holding right now?
So I come from a very, very humble background. And to cut a very long story short, my parents had an in-caste marriage. So they moved to Goa pretty early in their life. And that's where I started my journey. And then they moved to Gujarat and then, multiple places in India. And I think that's the essence of my journey of my life, because moving different parts of India also gave me the ability to see different parts of India, learn from different parts of India, and that you would think of that little germ of learning started very early in my life. You absorb a lot from different environments that you are in, and I think that's what kept me alive and kept me going. And the aspiration part also is there, that I wanted to do a lot of things at time. But you also realize very early that your aspiration and your aptitude has to match somewhere to get somewhere. And if it doesn't, you keep learning. So those are some things that, I learned very fast in my life. And I ended up doing my graduation and postgrad in Delhi. And while I was doing that, I think there was this huge wave of ESOPs and, voluntary retirement and golden handshakes going on in the country. And I think that really intrigued me. And what I thought is maybe I should do my projects in those areas. So I did my projects in those areas, and that's what caught my attention, that, those things really have a huge impact in people's life. They're drivers, what they do differently. Unlike, the most people that said that, I love working with people, I don't think I went into HR thinking that I love working with people. I think I enjoy the people dynamics, but I think what I enjoyed learning is what drives people. What holds people to different, sort of engagements in life. What holds people back? Why people want to leave company? What is it that holds people into companies? And those are the reasons why sort of I picked up human resource line of business. And once I started working in this area, my first job was actually in Shimla. And today people talk a lot about startups and startups, but I think my first gig itself was a startup because it was a pre-opening property of the Oberoi Group. And I'm not sure of how many people would know that in Shimla there was this property of Oberoi's called Mashobra's property, Wildflower Hall.
Right.
And Wildflower Hall at that time was in its pre-opening stage. And that's when, I sort of joined them as their HR supervisor. That was my first job. And, learning that itself was a great journey. And also, again, it was a different place. So, adapting to a different place, just learning how, the HR processes were set. And I think at that time, Oberoi was known the mecca for the hospitality industry. So that was just one of the best opportunities one could get. And then coming back to Delhi, joining back into an ITES sector, just learning the ropes of how the outsourcing industry was booming in India at that time. That was another way of thinking. And I may be very lucky, I think. My luck really supersedes sometimes my preparation, is because I started to work in a help desk opportunity of HR in a UK-based company. And I was managing over 7,500 people from a HR help desk. And that was the learning opportunity that I've got. And so I keep thinking that learning has been a thread for me throughout the year, throughout the life that I have lived. And so the one message that I give myself is that I've always been a student of life. Life has taken me in all of these places, and that's how I kept on learning. And that has probably brought me to different roles that I have taken upon in my journey or in my career, wherein, every successive role that one has taken has not taken only for, let's say, a career ladder. The role has been taken because there's something significant to learn in the role.
Right.
Which is something that I've never done in the past. So it's not like that I've been there, I've done it, and I want to do it. That urge of taking some risk, that urge of trying to build some competence, that urge of trying to do something different has actually pushed me to take the new role. And that's when, I've done that and then moved on to a different role. So, yeah, I think those are some of the things that I could say. Being a student of life is something that I really cherish.
I think this is a very interesting insight that, don't just focus on career ladder. Focus on something which will evolve you as a human. And that is when you probably chart a very good trajectory for yourself. You started with hospitality, then you went to ITES, right? And then you've been with different industries, diverse industries and diverse countries as well. And of course, started with Shimla and then moving to Delhi and then, just going across the world, right? Now, just want to get a summary of how does this global experience and this diverse industry experience helps individual evolve, right? And how do you bring all of that in in your leadership journey?
So, Tup, I think the one thing is that an individual is a leader in their own self, because their upbringing decides a part of it already.
Right.
And then a part of it is actually built through your experiences. For me, I think that stage started very early because I saw my mother, and my mother was like someone who gave me a lot of inspiration in that learning, because you're living in Goa and then moving, and they came from a very, very humble background. So just that inspiration sort of, kept me going. And then I think a part of it is also when you actually take those roles and you sort of are with an open mind that I'm here to learn, you are not sitting with a chip on your shoulder that I know it all.
Right.
Right? And so you're sitting with that aspect of open arms, that what you give me, I will take. I will listen, absorb, observe, and then I will suggest of what I want to do. And my global roles had been a function of this behavior.
Right.
Whether I've worked with folks in LATAM or in Indonesia or in Europe or in India for that matter, India is extremely diverse. It's not like, you work in the north and you get how you can work in India, but, the south is slightly different, the east is slightly different, the west is slightly different. But all you need to do is listen, observe a little bit, and then go ahead and make what you want to make as a point. And that gives people the confidence that you're here to give them the trusted confidence of what you can do. So that has really worked for me across all global roles that I had really played. Specifically, I think it got heightened with the recent role that I had at OLX Autos, because that was one of my toughest, but I think the most cherished role, I would say, and I would hands down say it is high on my list, is also because when I took that role, perhaps I didn't think it was that big. I just thought like, yeah, they have a lot of faith in me to be the, global head of HR for a company that we were integrating, and we were spread across countries. But I think my first conversation with my first CEO, so we had also 3-4 CEOs of that business, but my first CEO was, and I was thinking that it's only, perhaps LATAM and India. That's about it. So then he started counting countries for me. And when he started counting countries for me, it went to around 12 countries. And in that moment, in that rope was like a shock moment for me. Like, is this for real that he was, and this is around 6-7 years back, that is it 12 countries, and do you even know anything about these 12 countries? And how much do you know? Yeah, I was at Google. I did travel a lot, but that does not mean traveling is equal to managing those countries.
Right.
So you did have to learn a lot. So I did make a point, and coming back to that same philosophy of mine is you listen, you observe, you absorb, and then you go back and say what you want to do. And that sort of built a lot of trust. And because of that, I think our integration process also was faster. Building that team was also faster. And getting to that one OLX Autos vision also became faster, because that was one principle that we started ingraining in everybody. That look, if you've not worked with those countries, you're not going to go and tell them what to do. We're going to listen, you're going to observe, you're going to understand and absorb what they do differently.
Right.
And then we would say is, hey, can we marry these two things
Very interesting.
and do it differently?
Very interesting. I think that's actually a very actionable framework as well. I think I'm taking it as LOAA, that listen, like up to
Bit like
that's an action, right? So I think very important for someone who's joining a new environment or a new culture, right? That if you follow these 4 steps diligently, you can do wonders.
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of confidence in the other person or the other entity, the other side, that you're not here to tell you what to do. I'm sure we would have made a few mistakes in the beginning, but then there is a little bit of reflection you have to do, that what can I do differently? What is it that I'm not able to crack?
Right.
Right? And that's when there's a light bulb moment that tells you that probably you could have done things that would have gone right. And the moment you switch the gear, it works. And then you figure out that this is what works in the long run.
Buddha, since we're talking about the global experiences, and we spoke about OLX, I think OLX is something very close to you, right? But I would want to know the other side of the story, right? How does it feel to shut down a business when you started it from scratch, right? And that's the case with the OLX Latam business book, and how it happened, right? I mean, just want your experience on it.
I think, like I said in the beginning, it was not a realization. But over a period of time, when you're building something from scratch and you're the first few people just holding the baby together, or building the structure together and sort of making it happen, it becomes your passion project, right? And then you're sort of doing a lot of things to build it. I think that journey was brilliant in building everything together, and also the fact that you're working with some poor founders who you've acquired, and then you have to work with the thought that their incentives are different versus the company that acquires the company has a different incentive. So then how do you sort of bring them on the same page? And there are many people who are working in this. It's not only like HR is going to work on it, but there is this leadership team that works collectively on it. So I think it was great building that journey, and every milestone of the business, we had a lot of challenges to overcome. Right? But I think we took a call at some point in time that it wasn't going to work out, because you always have to go, and I think most startups would say that to you, that you would have to go and you would have to convince your investors that we're here to stay. We will give you the profit back. We will give you your money back, right? But if they are not able to see the day of light, then it's not going to happen at some point in time. So someone will pull the plug at some stage. And it did happen. So when that happened, I think the one thing as an HR professional is what you think is, now what do I do with so many people with that, right? And not only HR professional, just as a leadership group, because I'm not counting them out, because HR is just a function. But at the end of the day, this leadership group is one that's thinking of, how do we now go back and communicate? How do we now go back and say what we really built this team for, but now we have to change the course. We had to do that, but the two things that were extremely important for us is that what are the steps that we can take if we could conserve some jobs, right? If we could sell the business to different portfolios if possible, and so conserve some jobs, that would be one opportunity that we had at hand. So we did work with some consultants and did some pitches to sell some countries to some leaders in different markets. That was one that we had to do. And the second was that when we have to take the last resort, let's say of telling people we are going to do it absolutely gracefully and we're going to do it really well, so that there are lasting memories for people to take back experiences and not take back the feeling that, it didn't work out. Right? And till date, I have a feeling that, and because nobody walked up to me, and I suppose till date, anyone around that I meet from that time of like says that, we got treated really well. So thank you, Pooja, that we got treated really well. And it's not really thank you to me, but it's thank you to the entire leadership group or the entire OX community that really managed it well, is because there was a lot of respect in it. There was a lot of empathy in it. And there was a lot of thoughtfulness in it as how we were going to make that happen and how we were going to close the business out and what are the pieces that closing. So if I had to really say things right, keep people in the center if you had to take that call. You keep people in the center to take that call, you make the best of your frameworks. It could be that you're taking a cost-effective framework, still keep people at the center. It is the how that matters and not the what. Right? So I think we did that and sort of we ended on a good note, I would say, not on a bad note. But it was hard to let go. But people still remember it, and I also remember it as a fond learning experience, so to speak, versus something that we had to. So whenever I talk to people or I say what was my experience, I don't shy away from saying that we had to shut down the business. I say with a lot of pride that, we didn't do that, but we did that with pride.
And graceful.
And graceful. So that's how we did.
So very interesting. I think that's a very good lesson to anyone, who's probably has had a vision of making something really big. But somehow, because of some circumstances, you have to shut down the business. You just don't do it in frustration. There's like a textbook playbook which is out there. If you do it right, and people will remember you for ages. And of course, experience and keeping people at the center matters a lot. Great. I'll again go back to one of your international gigs. This is Google Dublin, right? And you actually helped Google set up that entire HR practice at Dublin, correct? One question which makes me very curious is, you've been someone who's born and raised in India, right? And when you have to set up something which is a people function and at a different country and continent altogether, how do you do it? And what does a leader think? How does a leader approach such situations? This is what I want to answer.
So look, I think the function was not like completely born already. I think we just had lost a few people in that team. And so I was like one substitute to be going there and sort of helping them set a few processes, because there was also like performance appraisal to be run there for a large ecosystem, and they didn't have anybody to be able to do it in first up and no senior person on the table. But for me, I think, again, I come back to the same thing. We as student of life think of what you're going to gain versus what is the risk of it, right? And just learn the culture of that place. It was beautiful to learn how sociable the place was and how warm that place was. And the one thing that I learned from that place is always start with a small talk, and it was brilliant to learn, that building relationships don't only start by saying hi. They start by talking about weather. They start by talking about, different things about life before you hit the nail on the topic. Those are some cultural elements that you will learn and they'll stay with you forever, and how relationships get built. That's the beauty of going to those places. Setting up a process, setting up HR or working with people is okay, and that will happen because that's domain-led and that will happen. But I think for me, it wasn't something that I found very hard on the domain side or on the work side. I think I initially found it very hard to adjust with the better, to adjust with the culture, because it was so social that I was almost antisocial in that country. And I feel like I'm not so social. I didn't even drink a drop of liquor at that time. And I'm not saying that I drink today, but I'm saying that I didn't even drink. So everyone would like be at a bar in the morning, 5 a.m. till 5 a.m. because they're watching all soccer matches.
Right.
Right. And that would be the culture of the country. But it was hard for me to absorb. But over a period of time, it got easier for me. And I started to talk to a lot of people, learn from them. And again, I may have not had that framework then, but I did learn and absorb a lot from that culture. Once you absorb a lot from the culture, you actually throw it back at your work.
Right.
And it became easier to sort of set things up. And, then talking to leaders also became very easy. And it was not that late enough that, I started to sit in their leadership meetings as soon as possible. And I was sort of sitting there and advising and also being a part of that leadership team and telling, the VP of Google that, this is what I think of how you should be investing in your leaders and doing your leaders. And what I was like, probably 10 years of experience and trying to tell them, with some 20 years of experience of what they should be doing in their jobs. But it does bring some elements of the fact that while I say I was lucky, I do believe that when preparation meets opportunity, it turns into luck. There was a little bit of preparation that I had to think that I need to have my understanding right of what the work I want to deliver. Who are the people I really want to meet? Who are the people I really want to build relationships with? I needed to do that prep in advance. Right? I needed to do what work I really want to go and do there. So it was not like all fun and only culture. But yeah, you had to do a little bit of prep. And this was an opportunity that had come to me by my manager, knowing that, I'm a married girl, I live with a joint family. It's going to be hard for her to take that decision in a whimper, but she had to come back to me like in a day. And therefore, it was an opportunity, but I sort of grabbed the opportunity at the right time. And so it turned into luck for me, and it turned into luck at the right time. So that's how I use this as an example that whenever you're preparing, think of preparation needing your opportunity at the right time. It will always turn into luck for you. Right. And that has really catapulted my career, because that international beat really taught me a lot for my future career opportunities. That, how you sort of build your space in an unknown environment when nobody knows you, but knows you from only your work.
Right.
But work is not the be all and end all, because you have to have some other skills in your back pocket to be able to be where you are. And that's what you need to do.
I think that's very interesting and a very great lesson in terms of someone, who's surrounded by a lot of issues, or maybe, the daily chores of life, but picking up the right opportunity at the right time can do wonders for you, right? Cool. We have spoken so much about your past. I think I'll just pivot to the current present, right? And I think the top of the down is Hero FinCorp has filed for IPO, right? It's just want to understand from you as a leader that how does, talent, leadership, and org, right, work together when you're filed for such a setting, and when you're about to become public, so that we reform ourselves to be the future ready entity.
So look, I think Hero FinCorp has a great legacy behind it. Hero MotoCorp and then Hero FinCorp. I think we are a brand to reckon with in the industry. And also, I think the brand has been rechristened last year, and it has become Hero FinCorp. And if you see the Hero FinCorp logo today, it has these windows that you see.
Yes.
It's actually windows of opportunities.
Wow.
Right? That's how we create the purpose in the company. Right? And when we look at that, the windows of opportunity is the way we communicate that with India is that we are the lenders of the rising Bharat. That's the purpose that we have for the company. Now, if you connect the dots of saying that we are going IPO, how does this really change the equation? It changes the perspective of what the company is really doing in the future. I'll take 30 seconds in trying to, sort of correlate this with the parable of the power of purpose. I was reading a story some time back that in 1966, I think, there was a fire in London, and then, London was completely razed down. And then there was this architect called Christopher Wren, who was sort of tasked to look around and sort of build things. And in, I think, 1971 or so, he was walking around people who were building. And there were 3 brick layers. They were sort of breaking stones and building bricks and, doing things. And he walks past 3 people, and he says, and all 3 of them are bricklayers. So he walks past one and he says, "What are you doing?" So he says, "I'm laying bricks because I have to feed my family. Can't you see?" Right? And he says, "Okay." And then he walks past the other bricklayer and he says, "I'm building this wall." Okay? And says, "Great." Then he walks past the 3rd person who's standing tall and he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm building this cathedral for the Almighty." Right? Now, all 3 were doing almost the same job, but there was a complete difference in purpose and perspective. Yes. Right? That's the perspective that shifts for a company when you're actually going IPO, because you're trying to build a sustainable company to the future and you have a purpose. And this purpose now is driving it for the country as well, because you're saying that you're relaying us the Rising Bharat. That purpose now also comes with the promises you make for the people that you will go out in the market, right? Because they will be your shareholders. You will make promises. Now you will have to have the leaders who live up to the promises.
Right.
So the shift of perspective is not only from building the cathedral, but is also living up to the promises that you have to when you're building the cathedral. Right? So you have to build the leaders along the way who can walk the talk, who are living up to the promises, who are completely owning the business and who make things happen. So make it happen is also one of our big values that we follow in the company. And those are some things that we sort of ingrain in our leaders. Now, looking into the business, filing an IPO has 2 major pieces. One is there's a lot of documentation, compliance. There's a lot of scrutiny of work that happens. So that's one part of the IPO. The other part of the IPO is how are you setting your business for a sustainable future? That's the second part of an IPO, because you're not always going to do firefighting.
Right.
You're going to have a long range view. And so your business should be sustainable for a long range view. And therefore, you start bringing shifts and turns in the business to be able to set your pillars of success for the future so that your pillars can't be shaken in the future. And those are the investments that you start making in the business. And those investments are largely driven by people and on the people. Those are the changes that we start to make in the business. And then you sort of look at talent from that perspective, and then you invest in talent from that perspective. You build org structures from that perspective, and you invest in building on structures from that perspective.
Great. And while all of this is being done, this is also keeping in mind, that you have to balance the internal employees' interest as well as the stakeholders' interest, because now they will have an equal say in the company that way as well. So my next question is on this bit only, that how difficult will it get, or how difficult do you foresee that this will get, balancing both the expectations? Because there might be days when, both of them are just not aligning. How would you do that?
And that will always happen. The peaks and troughs will always happen in the business. And that's the reason why businesses exist and businesses perish, right? But my fundamental principle of working in corporate world is that if there's a purpose and you have the right level of elements that drive that purpose, then things start to fall in place. And if you have overpromised, you probably may not deliver, right? But you underpromise, you will overdeliver, and the market will sort of catch you up there at some point in time. So you always will have to find that right balance of what are you promising and how are you sort of engaging your employees onto that promise, right? But promises are not all that matter. What are the tools that you're providing your people that are going to help them deliver on that promise? So you also have to now, while you're looking, outwards, you'll also start looking inwards and say, am I doing all the right things inside that my people are going to be able to deliver to the promises that I'm making to the market, right? So then you look inside and you'll say, do I have the right tools? Do I have the right systems? Do I have the right engagement processes? Do I have the right recognition programs? Do I have the right structures enabled? Do I have the right performance culture ingrained? Do I have the right incentive schemes? All these things sort of start to play out in the organization that sort of help you get to the point where you can sort of marry that with this.
I think this is very helpful. You are a women leader, and if I draw a parallel between India and the West, okay, the number of women leaders occupy such higher positions is way more higher than what we had in India, right? As a women leader who has done it right herself, what do you think are the challenges women generally feel currently in India, which is probably creating this difference of numbers versus the West?
I'm thinking that India is largely a culture where we have had women take multiple roles. The culture is important, but largely I would say in the metros or the 8-tier cities, right? The evolution is good and it's nice and nice to see a lot of progression happen. But still, I think there is a lot more work to do for women to be able to come out of their areas. See, the reason why women sometimes fumble after a certain point of their career, let's say in India, is also because there is lack of support system or an ecosystem that can help them take more responsibility after a certain while, right? So it's really important to invest in that support system. It is important to get the right support system for women to thrive. And here's where I would really say that, my mother was that pillar for me. She really gave me a brilliant support system. My husband is that pillar for me that gives me a great support system. My father-in-law is a great pillar to me that gives me that support system. So if I did have that support system, I probably would not be where I am.
Right.
Right. So it really depends on what support system you get and how you actually also build that support system. And I do understand that I'm one of the most privileged women that probably had the ability to build the support system. There are zillions of women who don't have the ability to build that support system, and they have to really work hard to be able to build that support system. So I think we still have to evolve as a society in building that support system or organically having that support system as a natural condition, as a hygiene factor that I'm going to support this and you're going to support me and we're going to do it together. It doesn't happen. And that's one of the reasons why I feel that women fumble after a while. It's not because of competence, but it is because of lack of support system.
I think that's interesting. And for all the women who's listening to this podcast, creating a support system is something very, very important for you to be able to climb that ladder of success. Interesting. You've been also, as I discussed in the introduction, you've been conferred with a lot of titles over the year, right? And I'm personally very curious over here that as to what does it take to win titles, right? Like, what are those 2-3 things someone who's just starting up his career or her career, right, should do right to make sure that they also end up, getting these titles more, right? So, an insight on that.
No, if you do nothing to win these titles, to be honest. With me, it has not been that you have to do anything. So two things. I think if you're in your early stage of your career, don't run after titles, don't run after any of these things because you have to really focus on your body of work. You really have to focus on what you're delivering, how you're delivering, how much you're learning, what new things are you doing. As soon as you start learning and delivering, automatically your body of work will talk for itself, right? And today we are in this age of, sharing a lot, writing articles, putting up more information, doing your podcasts like we're doing today or anything of that sort. People get to know who you are and where you come from, what your content is, and they will get to know. And there are bodies that will research you out and will tell you. But there are bodies also that will ask you for self-nomination, and then they will sort of seek you out, and then they will evaluate you. That's also possible. But frankly, I would say this should not be a focus area for anybody. I would kill that idea of focus for title. It will come when it has to come, and it will come seamlessly. Getting titles and stuff is a good thing, but it is not something that makes a difference to one career. I would say that all my roles that I have played, okay, they are CHR roles. But from a title perspective, I would have never put them on LinkedIn. I would not. Because that does not really matter. What matters is what you're doing as a role, what you're learning in that role, and how you're delivering, and what impact are you making in the business. That should matter to you more. Then going to the outside world and trying to say that I have got these awards, or I had done these things, or these are things. Because they will follow you. You need not follow them. That's the way I will look at it.
That's a very good lesson for someone who's starting up, because, a lot of times people would just have the motivation of maybe, bagging that 40 under 40, or like how you have Asia Pacific's top 50 most influential HR tech leaders. That might be inspiration for some people, but that's not the way for it, right? The way to go forward is get your job, do the best, what can actually impact the business, and probably these titles do that follow you. Don't follow them. It's very interesting. I would now also want to bring in a DEI flavor to the conversation, right? And BFSI traditionally had been very male dominated, right? But, there are certain strategies a lot of corporates across industries are deploying, right? To make sure, there is enough diversity, equity, and inclusion, which happens at the organization level. What are those actionable strategies you think, should be deployed? Or maybe you probably have deployed in your experience. Which talks for these?
I think from a DI perspective, the one thing I would say is that the world talks a lot about it. So there's a lot of lip service that can happen, and it looks good from an ethical angle. But the proof of the pudding is measure what matters. So if you really want to go the DEI route, it's important to put some measures of success, make some people accountable for that, for the measures of success, and then follow a foolproof strategy and execute them. That could be the way to sort of execute some of those strategies in the business. It could be around gender parity. It could be around bringing persons with disability. It could be just generally saying that I want to become a very inclusive environment. An inclusive environment does not mean only gender parity. And that's a myth that I see in most Indian companies, or most companies that, kickstart their agenda on DEI, like, we want to have more women. Great. You want to go for gender parity. That's your stage one. I do agree. But there are multitude of angles that we need to look at DEI. It could be with persons with disability. It could also mean that if you have a hybrid workforce, how are you making it inclusive for a person on video versus a person who's sitting right next to you? Because your natural affiliation is to talk to a person next to you versus talking to a person on a video. And you would not make that person inclusive. Right? You would just make the conversation with the person next to you, and then you would forget and say, I forgot to look at you or tell you, my voice may have not been clear, but I'll bring you up to speak later. And that's lack of inclusivity. So there are multitude of ways in which inclusivity can really make a difference. It typically means that you make most people welcome, you listen to people, and you hear their thoughts, and then sort of make action around them. But it doesn't mean only gender parity to me. There are ways in which there are companies that can come and help you to make that awareness happen in the company. When we launched something like that for OLX, and I think the first time you did that, we as leaders who were a part of a diversity council, and I was part of the diversity council, what we did is we got trained ourselves to first understand what are these biases really, right? What is unconscious bias? What is this bias? What is the system 1, system 2 that gets biased that way? So there is a scientific way of looking at diversity and inclusion, and there is a learning way of looking at diversity and inclusion, or a practical way of looking at it. And then we realize that, at one point in time, a person lives with over 150 biases. But generally, they're aware of not more than 10 to 15 biases ourselves. They're only aware of them. It's a large number. And there is a circular reference that they give us and they tell us these are the number of biases on this. And I looked at that grid and I was like, but I really don't know which to plug in for myself and which not to. Because we lived with them. See, we are all humans. We all live with them with all of those biases at some point in time, and we should humbly accept that we had those biases, right? But just being aware of them is the most important part of making an inclusive practice happen. So that's your first part. Your second part is then how do you really bring that into your corporate environment? One is your society and the second is your corporate environment. What matters? There are some countries that don't go for LGBTQ, but there are some countries that are open arms with that. So if you're handling a global environment, you can't just say one size fits all, this is my company's philosophy. You cannot. So you have to then sort of moderate yourself and say where it works, where it doesn't work, what you can and what you cannot do, right? And then you have to be more sensitive to people. And then you have to figure out what are the ways that you can make something more aware, but what is something that can be universally accepted? For example, gender parity is the first thing that people think is universally accepted. But what are the different ways? For example, I'm sure many of you must have heard of something called resume masking, which is you don't have the name of the person, sanitization of it. So you don't have the name of the person and you just did the resume and you just tear up. Towards the end, you get to know, okay, who are you actually going to interview?
Right.
Right? That's when you figure out who you would actually do. It's a male or a female, you really don't know. But that is actually to say that I'm not forcing a quota. But I'm saying I'm getting the best person, but I'm not biasing myself with any agenda on it. That would be a great practice. But if you really feel that the company is running with a bias and I need to give women more opportunity, then give 1 week of head start to women. Absolutely fine. That's okay. But don't make it the be all and end all of a hiring strategy. So you also will have to go with those balances and things like that. So those are some things that you have to do. And yeah, I mean, if you make leaders accountable for those goals, maybe, you have to shift the number of gender parity from X to Y. This is it. If you have to have persons with disability, X, Y, this is it. Last, when you're doing your performance appraisals, right? It is the responsibility of your business partner to partner with, let's say, a diversity council or a diversity committee to show that this is the appraisal outcome. These many people that are getting promoted, of this, these many women, and of this, these many people with disability, and this, that. You give the full data out so that you know exactly that is there any bias running in the system? Is there a bias? So you do your consistency checks in your appraisal process. You do your consistency checks on your compensation cycle process. If you're able to do that over a period of time, you'll be able to fix the problem. You won't be able to fix the problem at one go, but you will be able to solve the problem multiple cycles. But you are on that agenda. So that calls up the intent versus the solution.
I think that's a very interesting week and very informative as well as to how do you look beyond the gender parity, and how do you bring in all of these to make sure the organization actually believes in the DEI, right? So Pooja, I think it has been a very interesting conversation so far, but I also want to make it very meaningful for the people who are listening to us, right? Once this video gets recorded and also the live audience we are here. Now, if any of these folks would want to join the Hero family, right? What are those 3 non-negotiable skills these guys should possess, right? So that their path to entry is easy, right? And or now in the other way, how does Hero assess, people in general when they're about to recruit them?
So I think 2-3 things that come very high on our mind from a skill set standpoint is, A, you should be really good in what you do. So your domain is a hygiene factor. We're not worried about, domain piece. I think we can also train you, but domain is a hygiene factor. So that's not what we would really, really harp on. The skills that we would really look for in you would be, are you a problem solver? Do you take ownership? Do you communicate and collaborate really well? I think these are 3 things that really make a difference in do you get things done. I think these are 4 things that we would look as behavioral patterns in your conversations that you would have with you to understand that can you do these 4 things? If you can do, then you're a sure shot.
Fantastic. I think that will really help folks, kind of double down on their own skills and marry it with what is required, right? So that they carve their journey well into the company. Well, this brings us to the end of the podcast, and I'll just end the podcast with one reflection question for you. And probably this lesson would probably help a lot of us, who are listening to this podcast. Now, if Pooja has to, tell 20-year younger self of Pooja that, hey, look, if you want to be successful in life, these are the 2-3 things you should do, right? And don't do these 2-3 things, right? What are those 2-3?
I think if I had to tell myself and
Younger self. So,
yeah, younger self,
right.
thank you very much. Oh, yeah, totally. There are multitude of things that I must have not done right. But I'd say, if I had to pull that out in 3 or 4 sentences, I would say, vulnerability would have been a great accurate measure of my courage. And I should have really, really been a little bit more vulnerable in my younger age because I became really strong and I learned a lot of things. But I don't think I was that vulnerable then. Now I might think more vulnerable because I've learned a lot in my life. The second thing I would say is that you are only successful for the act that you have done successfully in that moment. But then you have to do it again. Right? So consistency is extremely important. And therefore, people say change is the only constant. I would say consistency is the only constant today in the corporate world. The more consistent you are, the better you are from a career standpoint. That is what I would say. And if I had to talk to you about the last thing, I would say just be a student of life, yeah? Don't take too much pressure, but life will teach you and go with the learnings of life. Your life experience is your best teacher. And don't get dampened by it. Only see the glass half full versus the glass half empty.
And to top it up, I think I'll use the framework which Pooja gave us some time back, which is LOAA. You listen, you observe, you absorb, and then you action. So I think if you do that in a review setting, it would work in your favor. It was very engaging and meaningful conversation, Pooja, and I thank you so much for your time. I personally had so much learning in this 40-45 minutes of conversation with what we had, and I'm sure it's going to help so many of us who listen to this podcast again. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. And a pleasure to see all of you being so excited and engaged in the conversation. So thank you so much for calling me up.